It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon when my wife stepped outside to address a minor dispute with the HOA officers. Their tone grew aggressive, and before long, what should have been a simple conversation escalated into something far more serious. They shoved her, raising their voices as though intimidation would win the day. What they didn't realize was that while she was my wife, the woman I swore to protect, I was not just any husband. I'm a retired Navy SEAL. Years of discipline, training, and facing real danger had shaped me into someone who doesn't tolerate threats, especially not against family. When I stepped out and saw her shaken, the switch flipped inside me. Calm, controlled, and precise, I confronted them, not with reckless anger, but with the kind of authority that comes from a lifetime of service. In that moment, their arrogance crumbled. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The moment my presence registered, the officers froze. Their bravado faded as I locked eyes with them, my posture alone enough to shift the balance of power. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. My calm, measured words cut sharper than any shout. Step away from her. Now. They hesitated, exchanging nervous glances, as though deciding whether to stand their ground or retreat. Years of tactical training had taught me to read men like this, the puffed-up egos, the false authority, the desperate need to control situations they didn't truly understand. My wife clung to my arm, her voice trembling as she recounted how they had grabbed her. That was all I needed to hear. I took a step closer and they instinctively backed up. "You think this neighborhood is your battlefield?" I said, my voice steady. "Let me make one thing clear, you don't lay a hand on my wife. Not today. Not ever." They stammered excuses, blaming protocol and rules. But their excuses fell apart under the weight of the truth. These men weren't protectors of order. They were bullies, and bullies always crumble when confronted by real strength. For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of my wife's breathing. Then, with their pride shattered, the officers retreated. I watched them go, knowing they would think twice before crossing us again. I wasn't looking for a fight, but if one ever came to my doorstep, I was more than prepared to finish it. That night, after the confrontation, I sat with my wife on the porch. She was still shaken, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped her tea. I could see the questions in her eyes, what would come next, whether the HOA officers would retaliate, whether we would ever feel safe in our own neighborhood again. I took her hand in mine and assured her, "They won't try this again." I made sure of it. But I knew men like that, they thrived on power, and humiliation wasn't something they would let go easily. Sure enough, the very next day, a letter appeared on our doorstep. Threats of fines, eviction notices, legal jargon meant to scare us into submission. I almost laughed. Paper intimidation? After years of facing enemies who used bullets and bombs, these scare tactics were nothing more than smoke. I walked into the HOA office myself, unannounced. The same officers were there, and their faces drained of color the moment I entered. I placed the letter on the desk in front of them, leaned in, and spoke quietly enough that only they could hear. "This ends now. You crossed a line when you laid hands on my wife. You won't get a second chance." The silence that followed was absolute. No excuses this time. No bravado. Just men who had realized too late that they had underestimated the wrong person. By the time I left the office, I knew the battle was over. They wouldn't come near us again. Back home, I wrapped my arm around my wife and watched her finally breathe easier, the tension leaving her shoulders. In her eyes, I wasn't just a husband. I was her shield, her protector. And though my Navy SEAL days were behind me, I realized something that night. Some missions never end. Weeks passed, and for a while it was quiet. Too quiet. The officers no longer harassed my wife. No surprise visits. No more intimidation. But I knew silence could be a cover. Men who'd been embarrassed often tried to claw back their pride in the shadows. And sure enough, one evening as I pulled into the driveway, I spotted them loitering near the corner of the street, pretending to inspect neighborhood property. I didn't approach right away. Instead, I watched. A SEAL never walks blind into a situation. We observe, calculate, and then act. My wife peeked through the curtains, worry etched on her face. "They're back," she whispered. That was all I needed to hear. I walked down the street, calm and unhurried, letting them see me coming. Their fake confidence cracked again, but this time I wasn't there to warn them. I was there to end this. "You think intimidation works in groups?" I said, standing just feet from them. "Try it again, and I'll have you in front of a judge so fast you won't even have time to pack your uniforms. Assault, harassment, abuse of authority. I know the law better than you think, and I know how to fight battles far bigger than this one." The tallest one shifted uncomfortably, muttering about misunderstandings. Another one mumbled an apology. I didn't move until all three of them agreed this would never happen again. When I turned and walked back home, I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. I knew they wouldn't follow. That night, my wife hugged me tighter than she had in months. "I don't know how you stay so calm," she said softly. I smiled, brushing her hair back from her face. "Because," I told her, "fear only works on people who've never faced real danger. And after everything I've seen, these men don't even come close." From then on, the HOA kept their distance. And while my days of covert missions were behind me, one truth remained. When it comes to protecting my family, I am always on duty. The neighborhood finally felt at peace again, but peace never lasts forever. A month later, I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe a stray animal, but then I caught the faint murmur of voices. My instincts, honed from years of operating in hostile territory, snapped awake. I slipped out of bed without a sound, motioning to my wife to stay put. Through the window, I saw them, the same HOA officers, but this time they weren't alone. They were standing near my truck, flashlights in hand, whispering as they tried to pry the lock. It wasn't about the vehicle. It was about sending a message. Wrong move. I moved like it was second nature, silent, precise, every step calculated. Years of training flooded back as though I'd never left the teams. I flanked around the side yard, staying in the shadows until I was directly behind them. "You boys lost?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. They spun around, startled. One dropped his flashlight. Another stammered something about routine checks. I stepped closer, my presence alone swallowing whatever courage they had. "Breaking into my truck at 2 in the morning isn't routine," I said, locking eyes with the ringleader. I leaned in just enough for them to feel the weight of my words. "Let me make this crystal clear. I don't care about your rules, your fines, or your threats. You laid hands on my wife once. You tried intimidation twice. This is strike 3, and where I come from, that means you don't get another chance.